So welcome everybody to this workshop on leading through challenging times. My name is Anna Day and I work for Successful Coaching, my business, and I also run Charity Consultants UK and Charity Leaders UK, which provide development support to leaders and consultants across the charity sector. And we have supported lots and lots of charities through challenging times, both in our work now and across previous recessions. So today I am talking about how to lead in challenging times through the unprecedented situations that we're in, and some of the tools and techniques and thinking that you can use to inform how you plan forward for your charity, sort of as we plan into the future, and also as we look at some of the difficult decisions ahead. So a bit of background to me: I'm a psychotherapeutic trauma-informed leadership coach. I've been coaching chief executives in the charity sector for 15 years now, and I've helped everyone from very small charities to very large charities to plan forward and think about their futures. So, well, with that, we will get started. Bear with me just a second. So one of the things I wanted to start off by saying is that the sector doesn't have a money problem. So last year, £97 billion of income came into the charity sector. And it's actually grown year on year. So when we talk about the money problems that we have individually, we need to understand that the money is out there, but we actually have a competition problem. So there's over 10,000 charities that have registered last year or tried to register with the Charity Commission, and only 187 that closed. Obviously, it's very sad that those charities did have to close, and obviously that in itself that number has grown exponentially in the last year. So one of the things that we're facing in the sector is, despite all of this income coming in, is that there is an increasing number of corporate competitors offering to do far more for less, creating a race to the lowest price and increasing the volume of services and decreasing the quality. So one of the challenges with that is that we're no longer just facing competition from other charities. We are actually facing competition from corporate companies now, who are seeing the volumes of income coming into the charity sector and eyeing it up as a corporate proposition. And obviously, just in terms of thinking about the way AI has shaped the sector over the last year, there has been obviously exponential increases in AI fundraising, which has placed extraordinary demand on funders. And we know that the funders themselves are struggling to be able to meet those demands too. So one of the things about this is that when we look at our own income mixes for our charities and look at where income is coming from for us, the likelihood is that you will be relying on one or two forms of income, but there is tremendous opportunities out there. So, for example, traded income could offer realistic opportunities for generating more income into our charities. And legacy fundraising is actually on a growth spurt at the moment. And from a legacy point of view, obviously, whilst it's unpredictable when the funding will come in, it tends to be in very large sums when it does come in. And it can be quite hard if you're running a small charity to be able to work out how you define where you're getting your income from and where you strategize for income growth. But I think the key thing here is, rather than trying to spread your organization very thinly across one income source, that actually you consider and develop multiple income sources to reduce dependency, particularly on trusts and foundations, which have become incredibly competitive. But trusts and foundations still make up a huge proportion of the sector. So the trust and foundation given out funds last year was 82 billion. So still a very large number that's coming out from trusts and foundations. But what's very interesting is that trusts and foundations are giving out 82 billion, We can't really see that in the Charity Commission stats. So that does mean they're giving out to other legal forms like social enterprises and things like that. So charities are sort of losing some income to their social enterprise pals because social enterprises are becoming able to mobilize and deliver very large contracts, running into tens of millions. So there's definitely, I think, as we move forward, a deeper sense of competition between the charity sector and other sectors to deliver charitable work. So it's no longer the domain and ownership of the charity sector. So thinking about as we go forward and we lead fundraising, obviously what funders are doing is trending towards funding past recipients more, so not sort of taking on new funders, and they are moving towards fundees, I should say, but they are prioritising spending time with funders, with charities that they've already developed relationships with and well-evidenced initiatives. So right now, direct relationships with funders are everything. And I think if you're a charity leader that is still thinking that fundraising is just really asking for money, you will need to be thinking much, much more closely about your customer journey, which needs a lot of attention, celebration, and in-depth consideration, and a really human relationship developing. So as much as AI can open doors for us, we still need to focus on the very important job of managing human relationships. And I think there are still charities out there who, sort of do not look at the touch points between, when somebody becomes a funder and when somebody ends their funding, like how often there is touch points in there and what the journey looks like to celebrate the funding that you're getting from those charities. And very often it's like this man falling off the cliff. It's like, hey, here's the grant, goodbye. See you later. We'll come back. We'll pull you off the cliff when we want to give you the report. And that's not going to work in this climate because the competition is fierce, and you being able to manage and maintain those relationships with your donors is going to be really key. So thinking about how you are going to become more attractive to funders, I always encourage people to look at the Little Blue Book by the New Philanthropy Capital. If you haven't seen it yet, then this is your guide to running an effective charity. But most importantly, it is used routinely by funders to develop the way that they analyse and assess grants against every charity. So obviously, when funders are making decisions, they need to make decisions against how do you determine a good charity. Now, the Little Blue Book was published some time ago now, in 2018, and has been since superseded. However, the fundraising mechanisms haven't really changed since it was implemented. And I still think it's a very, very robust framework of thinking, because what it does is assesses each area of your work, so your activities, results, and leadership. And then what it'll do is give an assessment criteria, and then excellent, good, satisfactory, or below expectations. So it's a little bit like an Ofsted report for charities. So for this is a really good mechanism for you self-assessing how well your charity is doing across each area. And what's really important to do is actually to do this with both your board, your leadership team, and the staff who work for you. Because what you'll find is that trustees will have one opinion of the organisation. Your fundraising staff, for example, will have another opinion of the organisation. You as a leader, as a chief executive or programme manager, will have an opinion. And then the staff who work for you will have an opinion. But just bear in mind, obviously, that very often when funders come in to assess you, they will assess against these questions, and they'll very often speak to staff, your volunteers, even your beneficiaries about you. And they will also speak to to your trustees as well. So if you don't have a coherent assessment of how strong you are and get everybody onto the same page as to where your organization's strengths and weaknesses are, then it starts to look to funders like either your trustees and your leadership team don't know how the staff feel about the organization, or the staff don't understand the leadership and governance of the organization and what they're doing for the charity. So this piece of work, this self-assessment, becomes a framework of thinking for thinking about how you communicate your success to charities. Now, to funders. And what's really important here is that you don't have to be excellent across each area. The goal is to have a realistic self-assessment of where your charity is at, and most importantly, a plan of how to move towards excellent. So just like an Ofsted report has an improvement plan if you're below expectations on things and you're below satisfactory, that actually charities should be making plans for when they are below expectations as well in an area and prioritizing their development in those areas. And it's very good to communicate to funders that you have this development plan that helps you to get to excellent, because that is going to give you a very robust structure for communicating both your future vision and your internal organizational development. So just to take a look at that for a second, so obviously it focuses on activities, results, and leadership, as you might expect. And then there's also people and resources, finances, and ambition. So in each area, you just mark yourself down and determine, and you can download this for free from the New Philanthropy Capital website, and we'll send this PowerPoint out to everybody at the end so you can see what's involved, and just go straight through to the document. It's very easy to get hold of. So in terms of thinking about how funders use this is a framework of thinking that helps them to understand between excellent, good, and satisfactory charities, but it also helps them to determine which charities are the best to invest in from a funding point of view. So what you can start to do is to weave this narrative into your fundraising so that you can effectively start to portray the picture of the whole organisation when you're writing the bid. So it's not just, this is the service we wish to deliver, but this is the context of the organisation in which we're delivering it in. And to just demonstrate to you how impactful this is. When we've done this in bids, funders say it's the best bid they've seen all year, and that's major national funders saying that who see thousands of bids. So it is a very powerful way to communicate your effectiveness and to show funders that you're very serious about your organisation's practice as a charity. So thinking about you as a leader then, so there is some instant wins that you can achieve when the going gets tough. So 92% of stakeholders are more likely to trust an organisation whose senior executives are on social media. So that is your chief executive. So if your chief executive isn't on social media talking about your organisation, that is a serious red flag for funding. And there was other research indicating that trusts and foundations actually went as far as to say they didn't trust a charity who did not have an active CEO on social media. So it is very, very important to get your leadership team out onto social media to support your fundraising. And in terms of thinking about social proof, social media activities by leaders build social proof, and that can lead to over 25% higher donations as supporters feel more assured by seeing active public engagement. So this isn't just about funders, this is about inspiring and creating influence in wider donors as well. And just to talk a bit about the importance of websites, because a lot of funders are now going to a proactive approach to find the charities they wish to support. Essentially, your website has become one of the most important places for you to present the work that you're doing. And 54% of donors prefer giving directly through a charity's website. So it's the most preferred method for online giving now. So if your website is not actually taking donations directly, that will be hitting your bottom line. And video engagement shows that 57% of donors watched a video before giving. So again, just thinking about simple things that you can do. Does your charity's website have videos that tells them about the difference you make? And then security concerns. So 69% of donors worry that their information will be hacked when donating to a charity. And that means that very often there will be a low completion rate of those donations because people do not feel secure passing their details to your charity. So this is important to know because we are going to a much more security conscious, cyber security conscious period where people are genuinely extremely worried about giving their details to websites. So this is something that we can do to, just simple things like making sure that you've got good payment processes where the donors are protected can make a massive difference here. So thinking about doing more with less, I mean, we talk about it all the time, don't we? But actually, one of the key things is that a lot of charities still haven't sort of caught up in terms of digital, and that there is huge opportunity through automation, and that can't be ignored, especially as your charitable competitors like corporate companies will be going very heavy on automation now. So, for example, Saklana is a really cheap CRM that costs just £470 per year to implement, and you can completely automate your donor journeys and also think about automating your frontline services as well. And that is really crucial if you're having to send emails and phone calls and book appointments and follow-ups with your clients as part of your client journey, that actually automation has a huge role to play in that, and AI can be especially helpful there. We're not seeing the levels of take up in the charity sector that we see in the corporate sector of using AI. And I really do just encourage all of you to think about how you can use it. Claude is brilliant and you can train it on your Google Drive. But if you would like to keep your data confidential, then Copilot, Microsoft's Copilot, can be trained on your data, but keeps the data in your organization. So you're not training AI that could leave the organization. So that can really save you a tremendous amount of time. And certainly right now, giving your staff the resources to access Claude and Copilot can make a massive difference in the amount of time they're saving from one day to the next. A quick hack is that you can also automate your funding searches in ChatGPT daily and get it to send you results daily. So you can actually just ask ChatGPT to email you the results of all your funding searches. So just the same way as you might do a Google search for funding, you can get ChatGPT to just send you any grants it's found in the last 24 hours. And that will save you both money on finding suitable funding, but also save you a lot of time searching for yourself. So we're going to move on now to thinking about what you can do as leaders. And what I see at the moment in leadership is a lot of people who are in reactive emergency. And what I mean by reactive emergency is that they are stumbling from one sort of crisis to another. And I think of it like the tiger down in the savannah. You can have, if you're the tiger in the savannah, if you want to go hunting, you can chase, run around the savannah like a headless chicken looking for your prey, or you can climb up into the tree and survey the savannah. And one of the things for you as leaders is to really just take time to stop and plan and strategize. That it is very easy to kind of get bogged down with everything day to day and sort of end up in a situation where you're very reactive to emergencies, you're very reactive to grants coming on and commissioning coming on and things like that. But actually a lot of that can be planned out. And when you stop moving from reactive and you move to proactive, it also really supports an excellent funding strategy and excellent survival strategy as well, because actually just taking that time to look forward to the future and to think about all the possible outcomes that can happen can help you to just plan better. And there is a courageous questioning exercise you can do where you ask yourself, what's the worst things that can happen in the charity over time, over the next year, over the next 2 years, over the next 5 years, and then plan for what would happen if that were to happen to you, so that you stop being blindsided by emergencies and start to plan for them, but also plan for the best case scenario as well. I think it's really important to avoid catastrophizing. And what I mean by that is it's very easy for us to assume that everything is going really badly at the moment. But one of the reasons why I shared the figures about how much income is coming into the sector is to show you that actually we've got £97 billion coming into the sector. So the sector is not broke, it's not down on its knees, but we do need to do things differently. So when people are asking us how to build forward and how to build a sort of positive momentum and strategy for our charities, I think we just have to avoid getting pulled into negative loops, and making meaning out of things that perhaps don't deserve that type of meaning. So an example of that is very often when you have a sort of difficult funding decision of a no coming back on a large grant, and you're left having to make sense of how to deal with it and how to move forward. And it's really important to just keep in perspective that one grant now ending is not the end of a charity or an organisation. And obviously, when it's a very large funding bid or funder, yes, it can dramatically change the landscape for charities, and we have to recognise that, but it doesn't necessarily mean the end of the charity. And we'll talk a bit more about what an ending does mean in a little while. But thinking about celebrating successes, I think it's really important that even when things are tough, that we celebrate the small things that go well, and just make sure that we are actually talking about it publicly and privately, and acknowledging our staff's role in things going right. It's very easy to look at what's going wrong, especially when there's so much negativity in the atmosphere and in our society at the moment. But those stories of hope give people hope. And I think what's really important to recognise here is that right now there is a lot of negative voices in the environment, talking about racism, hard right, fascism, and things like that. But actually, if you talk about the successes of your work in the environment, it can have the opposing effect where you inspire people to do some more good in the world. And I just encourage you all to be very vocal right now about your doing good in the world, because right now we've got a lot of leaders in the world who are very vocal about doing bad things in the world. And I think you need to be the voice of change in that. So thinking about the next thing is when things go wrong. And it's very easy for organizations to sort of fall into a situation where they are looking at trying to microanalyze why things went wrong. But instead of asking why, it's much, much more helpful to think about what can we try next, because understanding and trying to kind of unpick everything that could possibly have gone wrong with something doesn't actually fix the fact that it's gone wrong. Thinking about what can we try next is a more positive way of moving your team forward, and also being able to just give your organization space to make mistakes as well. Because if you always think about why something has gone wrong, then it puts people into a position where they start to blame each other. Whereas when we talk about what we can try next, then we're not acknowledging the failure, but what we're saying is, okay, we're going to build and learn from what we've done and do something differently. And I think that's key to culture, because actually your organizational culture really hinges on being able to get people through this difficult time, and rejections and no's are going to become more common than yeses, and it's important to keep staff and volunteers motivated through this. So thinking about finding boundaries. I talk to a lot of leaders about boundaries, because I think it is very tempting to try to work harder to get some of the problems that we are facing to go away at this point in time. However, the tricky thing about that is that we do not do our best work after we've been working 8 hours. So after 8 hours, our productivity sort of rises over the 8 hours. So our productivity is quite high, but after working 8 hours, our productivity completely slumps. So even if you work all evening or get up very early in the morning to extend your working day, that actually all you're doing is decreasing the quality of your decision making and decreasing the quality of the work that you're doing, which in the short term might feel like you're being productive, but in the long term, you'll be mopping up your own and your team's mistakes. So finding boundaries is really about being boundaried in your work, about what you can do in a working day, that you're all humans first. And it's really important for you to understand and to know that actually all humans need the same amount of rest, and we can convince ourselves that we're superhuman and that we're invincible. But actually, when we overwork and we overgive, it doesn't actually improve the quality of what we're doing, but it also has such a huge impact on our individual health and well-being. And the evidence is there that actually leaders who overwork end up with very severe autoimmune diseases and things like that. So it's not a longevity strategy that is good for your well-being or good for the organization. And, as much as it can feel like you're getting a lot of work done at the time, that the problems that you are building up are just so much bigger. And I think it's really, really important that you help your own staff and your own volunteers to keep within the hours they've committed, and to work hard in those hours, but just not to overgive, because you do end up in those burnout situations where you're just burning through staff, and that is costing you more longer term, because you're having to backfill all those vacancies. So if you keep your staff within their hours and your volunteers giving reasonable amounts of time and not excessive amounts of time, that actually you're going to increase the quality of your retention in your team, and you're also going to help the organization to grow and develop. So thinking about, I want to talk about the sunk cost fallacy now. So this is an interesting one. So the sunk cost fallacy is a cognitive bias that causes Bob to remain committed to a course of action because he's already spent time or resources on it, even though the commitment is irrational. Bob will be better off taking the loss and walking away, but he keeps going. So the reason why I want to talk about the sunk cost fallacy today is that as charities, sometimes we spend a lot of time being like this dog, kind of digging along a line that's not really producing the results that it is. They're trying to go down a new track, but they're not doing it well. And I don't think there is the space in the sector at the moment for charities to do work badly. And the reason why I say that is because any charity that's delivering a service that is not a high quality service and it's not actually making a difference is just sinking money into this sunk cost fallacy. It's just following a bone, but not really getting there, in terms of actually delivering on the intentions. So it's really much, much, much better for you as a charity if you focus on what you do well and you deliver it brilliantly, because I don't think there's the space and the capacity in the sector right now for us to be delivering services badly. So every charity needs to know when the financial line is when they need to give up as well. So looking at the affordability of your services is really crucial, and whether you're delivering them profitably. So there is lots of services at the moment that charities are delivering across the sector where they are losing money hand over fist in delivering them. I'm sure some of the people on this call will be delivering those services right now, where a funder has funded part of the service and the charity is having to put money into the service to deliver it. And I think that's really a financial line where charities need to understand where their boundaries are, especially, for example, with the national insurance increases recently. We need to be thinking about how we actually support our frontline delivery and whether we continue to deliver services at loss for the public sector. And I think it's really problematic delivering services that are not at full cost recovery. So full cost recovery is where you recover all the costs attached to delivering a service from the funder that is giving you the money. So just in terms of thinking about the overall picture, I think there's also an element of looking at the sunk cost fallacy with actually running your charity as well. Because ultimately, if your charity is running on fumes in terms of funding, there is costs to winding up a charity like redundancy pay, final salaries, closure, legal costs, and contracted costs that you need to be maintaining and keeping in the bank account so that you don't spend into money that needs to be used to wind up the charity should the charity ever need to be wound up. So it's just really important that you make sure that you know what that figure is, how much money you need to keep in the charity to be able to cover its wind up costs, and to be ready to draw the line and say enough is enough. Okay, we may have to close the charity. But I think it's also important here to understand that actually, if you work towards financial deliverability in the first place, where you are clawing back the full cost recovery, that actually you're going to be in a stronger position to actually keep the charity going in the first place. And that's why we look at the charity budgets being full cost recoverable from their funders, because it's very difficult to deliver a service and give you some sustainability long term without that. So I wanted to talk a bit about on leadership optimism. So if you have a look at these two vehicles, obviously you have a choice, don't you? About which one you're going to get in. Would you get on a bus? I call it the success bus, or would you get on the sinking ship? So as a charity leader, if you are overly negative to your funders about the future, I mean, you don't paint any sort of optimistic picture, then they are going to view you as the sinking ship. Whereas the success bus, it's running, it's on the road, you know where it's going, it's got people in it, there's a direction, the route map is there, you know what time it's going to arrive and what time it's going to leave and where it's going along the way and how long it's going to take you to get there. And the analogy for our leadership really is just about painting a vision of success for our staff and volunteers, allowing them to get on that success bus, and just recognizing that when we draw ourselves into kind of a negative frame of thinking in our leadership, that we are painting that our organization as that sinking ship and not the success bus. And we all have choices about what we disclose as leaders, and if we are overly doom-filled, if you like, and tend to fall into the negativity, then we are going to be painting a vision that is going to be very difficult for funders to get on board with. So I was once speaking to a funder who explained to me how they made decisions about giving grants. And I'm not going to name this funder, but they are a major, major national funder. And they said to me, we have a bunch of charities in one pile who have a good project. Then we have a pile of charities that don't have a decent project to fund, but are asking for funding. And they're always wanting us to bail them out and, this was his words, throw good money after bad. So then there's people that are just unfundable. Now, what he's saying as a national funder is that there is the shortage of projects is the ones that have fundable projects that make a difference. So what he was telling me is that their fund is heavily underspent each year, not because of the number of applications, but because the quality of the applications doesn't portray a decent project. It doesn't portray a realistic system or service change, that there is no real change for the beneficiary, the person taking part in the project. And I think that is a lesson that I've heard again and again from very, very wealthy philanthropists who tell me that there is not a shortage of money, there is a shortage of good ideas. So this narrative that you share about the charity's future needs to reach those funders, because obviously these funders don't always buy into your idea for social change, your idea for changing the world or your little part of the world or the people that you serve or the environments that you work in. So portraying a fantastic story about how you move forward is one of those things that will help funders to understand whether this project will really make a difference or not. And, they want to get on board with successful charities. And honestly, these funders have enough background by now that they understand fully whether it's worth saving a charity or not. And most of them say it is very difficult to save a charity, and the ones that we've given money to just do not turn around. So we are reluctant to do that. And then funders also say we all talk to each other. So if you're telling one funder that you're, going down and things are difficult, that will get through to other funders. But equally, if you're talking about your success to one funder, you can ask that funder to recommend you to other funders, and you can ask them, would you support me to apply for funding from this other funder? And use that relationship with your grant maker to open doors for you and to really help you to move forward. So we've covered a lot. So what I wanted to cover now is just a bit about your own well-being, because these topics are very tough and they are heavy on us and our beings. It feels heavy to talk about these things, even I can feel heaviness even just talking about it. But one of the things that you can do to start to look after yourself are these micro moments of well-being. So obviously, we all think of the types of things we might do for our well-being outside of work, like, go for a jog or go for a walk or, pat our dogs or have a hug with somebody that we love and care for, etc. But actually, those things don't keep us well during our working days. So thinking about your well-being, what's really useful to start doing is to take mini micro moments of well-being through the day. So some of these can look like box breathing, and there's a diagram on the right that just explains that. So that's just breathing, essentially in for 4 seconds, holding for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, and then holding for 4 seconds. Now, if you do this around 16 times, it regulates your nervous system brilliantly and helps you to feel relaxed. So, when you've got that next big meeting with the board, or you've got a stressful meeting with a funder, or perhaps with the staff or volunteers, that actually just doing this box breathing before you go into that meeting will help you to just relax and enable you to reset your nervous system. And what we're aiming to do with this is to do this regularly enough that it happens throughout the day, just for a short period. So even just 5 minutes in the day can make a huge difference. And those 5 minutes can just be breathing, or you can do things like put on a candle or a joss stick, or you can put eye mask and headphones on just to temporarily shut out the world for 5 minutes. So this isn't about, sort of slacking on the job per se, but this is about how you maintain peak performance over a day and keep yourself aligned with a relaxed state all the way through the day. So instead of gradually increasing your stress through the day so that when you go home you feel really stressed and wound up, that actually if you just take these little micro moments of well-being in the day, that actually you can go home and be fully present with your family, your friends, your loved ones, or just with your animals, whatever, that actually your home time becomes your own, instead of taking your emotional heaviness home and then having to do that regulatory work at home. And some people turn to alcohol, some people turn to sort of smoking or all sorts of things to relax themselves. But actually, you can do this simply through breathing exercises and through just taking time to regulate your nervous system. So we'll just go through one more slide before we go on to questions. So just a second. So I just wanted to talk about how trauma plays out in your team. So very often, we all have histories of everything that's happened to us in our lives. Our emotions cannot help but come into work with us, because we are, as all human beings, with histories, and sometimes we'll find that hypervigilance can masquerade in high performing team members as acute threat, really, and reading the room, anticipating conflict and over preparing. And it can look like diligence and commitment, but underneath it's an exhausting survival strategy. And we see a lot of people in the charity sector who are really high performing, but underneath they're struggling. And we can end up unknowingly rewarding that pattern and reinforcing it rather than creating safety that would make it unnecessary. So I think what's really key here is when we think about looking after our team members, that we don't assume that our most high performing team members are successfully managing underneath, and we can take that time to find out how they're really doing using our one-to-ones and like day-to-day interactions to find out how people are actually coping. When we think about leading as well, it's really important to think about about fixing ruptures in teams. So quite often there might be situations where your team are not getting on with you or each other, and quite often if we're not prepared to address those situations in the moment, those unruptured repairs accumulate, and essentially the team will develop implicit rules around that, which is don't challenge, don't be visible, don't trust. Now, if we want to create teams that trust one another, what we need to be thinking about is actually acknowledging the difficulties in the room as and when they come up, and thinking about how we support people to resolve conflict. And when we bring that out into the open, and naming it, and naming the discomfort that people are sitting with, that actually we allow them to have what I like to think of as professional disagreements. So it's okay that one person might disagree with another, but if we can't be open about our disagreement, then that would be an unrepaired rupture. Whereas if we talk about it, it can be a repaired rupture. So, okay, I think this, you think that. We can still move forward together, even though we have a difference of opinion on these matters. So obviously what we want to be doing is creating safe spaces for our staff. And if we enable people to repair their relationships in real time, talking about conflict and talking about the difficulties and bringing the elephant in the room to the table, that actually we can start to build robust organisations where staff and volunteers feel safe to challenge one another in a safe way and come out of it with a resolution. So thinking about your own leadership behaviour. So your emotional state is contagious, so not just metaphorically, but neurobiologically. So people pick up on how you are. So a leader who is dysregulated, unpredictable, or avoidant will dysregulate the whole team around them, even without saying a word. And conversely, if you can stay regulated under pressure, name the difficulties without catastrophizing, and repair when things go wrong, you will begin to regulate the whole team's nervous systems and emotions. And that is the golden work of being able to support teams to grow and develop, where they feel safe and they trust you as a leader. And trust is not something that you can give them deliberately, but something they choose to give you. So the leader's inner work is not separate from the team. It is team health. So when you start to do this inner work, actually, you start to see the transformation in your team. And I think that is something incredibly powerful. That actually, when you can stay calm in those day-to-day situations, that you're giving permission to others around you to stay calm too. So thinking finally about some quick tips for how you can deal with things in the day-to-day whilst you're learning how to lead your teams in an emotionally safe way, just to cover. So just name what's happening. So don't manage around difficulty, acknowledge it directly. So team leaders don't need leaders to have all the answers. They need you to know that the leader can see the reality clearly and won't pretend otherwise. And they need leaders who understand their own strengths and weaknesses. It's okay that you don't know how to do everything. And your goal as a leader is never to know how to do everything, but it's to bring people around you who complement your own strengths and weaknesses so that you can work together as an effective team. So regulate yourself first. So when you notice yourself starting to feel nervous, just take a moment for a little while and actually do those micro moments of sanctuary, of doing that breathing work or just taking a breather. Like, you cannot resource a team from an empty tank, and your nervous system sets the tone. So always attend to your own stabilization, whatever that looks like for you. Take time to stabilize and acknowledge other people's feelings in meetings. So the very common thing that I often hear people talking about in the charity sector is CEOs having difficulties managing the unpredictable emotions of trustees, and sometimes those unpredictable emotions playing out in ways that can look like anger, frustration, upset in board meetings. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that those feelings exist, in those board meetings, in those settings, but also decide what you can give permission to, because obviously you can give permission to someone to be angry in a board meeting, but you can't give permission to someone to start shouting and being abusive. I've seen that in boards before now, and that actually, as a lead, what you can do is keep that safe space by asking the person who is not being in control of their emotions to leave the meeting so that they can regulate their emotions and come back when they are regulated. So by creating those safe spaces where people can talk without feeling threatened, and where they can work together without fear of their own emotional harm, we enable teams to start working more effectively together. And we've all seen this in workplaces, in different guises, people who bring high emotion into work. And the key is to notice the high emotions, observe it and say you can see it, and to give them space to vent, maybe in private, but also to then help them to find a way forward and to stabilize and come back into the organization when they're stabilized, and whether that sort of 5-minute walk outside, or whether it's taking some time to have a cup of tea with you and talk about what's wrong with them. But I think all too often we see very dysregulated behaviours in boards, and we fail to take action because of the power dynamics. But actually, if you create space where you say this is the acceptable behaviours in these meetings, and then if that actually the problem is never just it's not the anger per se, because people are allowed to be angry in a meeting, but it's the form of expression. So we can legitimize people's feelings without legitimizing the behavior that is causing distress to other staff members or volunteers. So thinking about predictability, we're living in a society that is just going through such rapid change at the moment, whether that's caused by AI or caused by what's going on in society more generally. One of the things that you can do just to help stabilize things is to just create some consistent routine and check-ins in your own organization, creating clear expectations, reliable communication, and structure, because it's a form of safety. So whether that is just having like weekly check-ins with your staff, or having set celebrations each week where you might acknowledge the great work that your staff of volunteers have done. Having those sort of landmarks in the week that guide you through the week will help people to feel a bit more stable when everything around them in their wider world might feel everything but stable. Making it safe to struggle. So wellbeing initiatives mean nothing if culture punishes vulnerability. So we talk a lot about saying we support mental health in the workplace, but when somebody is actually unwell in the workplace, there tends to be quite punitive measures or a sort of signposting to employment assistance initiatives. And I think it's really important that we make safe spaces for people to be vulnerable and to say, okay, I can see you're upset. What can we do to help you in this moment? And to work out how to help people to step in and step away from work as needed, and to make it safe for them to do so that they can acknowledge the struggle that they're going through. And then just finally, to repair things when things go wrong. So leaders who rupture and repair openly create something very powerful, because ultimately you are all setting the culture in your organizations where you can move forward and create the type of organization that you want to be working in. You holding people to account for their behavior and their culture and attitudes just gives the space that the organization needs to become what you want it to become. And I see quite a lot of chief executives feeling like they're beholden to the organization of the culture instead of upholding and leading the culture. And I think one of the most powerful things you can do as a charity leader is be very deliberate about what type of relationships you want to foster in the organization, what kind of safety you want to foster in the organization, and ultimately what kind of organizational culture you want people to feel. And I think of it like a weather system. So what is the weather in your organization? When people walk into your organization, is it the storm or is it summer? Is it the winter where it feels dark and down, and or is it uplifting, upbeat and friendly? You get to make those choices as leaders. So it's just really to make sure that you think about that deliberately and act upon it to create the kind of organization that you actually want. So that's the end of the presentation. Jess, do you want to go to questions?
Yes, I will. Thank you. I'll just give people a moment to pop those in the chat. I do have one myself, actually, if that's all right. We've got people who have booked on and who will be sent the recording from all different roles within charities.
Mm-hmm.
And I've recently become a trustee, so I wanted to ask you, what do you think is the best way the board of trustees can support the CEO and SMT in a way that's really effective? Since obviously you've been a CEO at a charity in the past, what would your experience be?
So I think for boards, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the sort of rubber stamping exercises that come with being on boards, like checking the policies and the procedures and things like that. And what I would encourage boards to do is to create space for thinking at each board. So where there's, half an hour of unfettered thinking time about how you can make the organization better. And to use that to do deep dives across different aspects of the organization. So maybe perhaps like one board meeting will be on how, how do we what do we think of the organization's culture right now and what could we do to improve it, for example? And you might do like a deep dive on that. And the next deep dive might be, how do we improve the retention of staff and how do we improve the talent and succession pathway in the organization? Because what happens is I think a lot of boards end up just dealing with the business of boards, but they don't get to use their extraordinary capabilities and professional expertise. And I think if you create the space for in-depth professional expertise contribution, that you see the strengths of boards and the strength of thinking. Because if you think about it, when you hire a lawyer, an accountant, a HR advisor, to the board, you might get somebody in marketing, communications, etc. Like, how often do they actually get to contribute their expertise versus just their board knowledge? And I think good boards will attack a problem with both the professional with the professional expertise as well as the board knowledge. So the board knowledge is charitable governance, if you like, everything that might be sitting in the charity commission sort of guidance, whereas board knowledge is all of the professional expertise that people bring with them when they come into the role that could meaningfully make a massive difference to that charity. And that charity cannot buy in any other way from anyone else. So if that is being provided by the board, then that is a really useful asset to the chief executive and the leadership team. But I also think boards can play a really important role by having working groups that focus down on more specific topics like finance, people, HR, operations, and things, so that you can have those really in-depth conversations about where a charity is going and how it's going to deliver its services better.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So we don't have any questions at the moment, but I imagine that's because it was so thorough and you've covered so much in the session.
Oh, there is one here.
Oh, is there? I can't see it for
Yeah.
some reason. Sorry.
One attendee has said, is there any advice about social media channels CEOs need to be on? For example, LinkedIn, which is a more professional platform compared to Facebook and Instagram. So my view is that LinkedIn is where most funders are. If you want to influence funders, then being on LinkedIn is really crucial. And I would say that having I mean, people have moved away from X recently because of the scandals around Elon Musk and the lack of policing on X. So I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to have an account on X at the moment. I would say having some social media presence on Threads or Facebook is useful as well, but I would direct the Threads and the Facebook content to being more donor facing. So if you think about it, like sort of LinkedIn acting as a kind of influencer to professionals and stakeholders in the charity sector, so your trusts and foundations and things, and then your Facebook and your X, no, sorry, not X, your Facebook and your Threads being facing towards your beneficiary and donors. So those, the more sort of people-driven campaigns. So your crowdfunding campaigns, for example, would always be much, much more successful through Facebook. So Facebook fundraising is phenomenally more successful than any other platform.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Apologies. I'm having technical difficulties this end.
That's okay. Is there any other questions anyone would like to ask? I just give a minute just to see if anybody types anything. So, right, okay. So, with that, we'll close the seminar. But just to say, if any of you have any questions, please do get in touch. We'll be happy to hear from you. And obviously, just in terms of thinking about what will happen, we will be emailing out the Leading and Challenging Times guide to everybody who's attended the webinar today. It covers more comprehensive topics than today's webinar could possibly cover, but obviously is a great guide just to help you think about some of your practice as a charity leader. But thank you for coming today. It's lovely to talk to you all and get to know you better. And yeah, thank you so much and take care and good luck with the next chapter of your charity.
Thanks ever so much, Anna. That's been brilliant.
Thank you.